The desert air outside the forward operating base in Helmand Province wasn't just hot. It was a physical weight, pressing down on everything, leaching the color from the landscape and the patience from men. Captain Mark Rourke felt it as he stood in the command post, his knuckles white around the edges of a classified after-action report. The file was sanitized, smooth, a perfect bureaucratic lie. It detailed the successful neutralization of a high-value target in a remote village called Garmsur, attributing the intelligence to routine aerial surveillance. But Rourke had been there. He had seen the precision of the raid, the way the Special Forces team, call sign Ghost Talon, had moved not with the blunt fury of a hammer strike, but with the unnerving, surgical certainty of a scalpel. They knew things they couldn't possibly know, where the target slept, the location of a hidden escape tunnel, even the name of his young son. The official report made no mention of Ghost Talon's mysterious civilian liaison, a man named Elias Voss, who drifted through the base like a ghost himself, never in uniform, answering to no one Rourke could identify. Voss had cold eyes that seemed to catalog everything and reveal nothing. The unease that began as a whisper in Rourke's mind grew into a shout after the Garmsur operation. 2 of his own Marines, on a separate patrol, had been lured into an ambush in a sector marked cleared by Ghost Talon's intelligence. They died because of bad information. Or, as Rourke's gut now screamed, convenient information. His attempts to ask questions were met with a wall of polite, firm deflection. His company commander told him to focus on his own sector. The Special Forces detachment was off limits, their work compartmentalized. The civilian Voss? Forget you ever saw him, Captain. That's a direct order. But Rourke couldn't forget. He was a career Marine, built on a foundation of duty and truth. He started digging quietly, using the limited access he had. He found patterns. Ghost Talon's operations were flawless, but they only occurred in areas with one common, buried thread: ancient trade routes, now obsolete, that intersected with zones of heavy Taliban opium trafficking. Their targets weren't always ideological leaders. Often, they were logistics men, financiers, middlemen in the drug trade. The official line was that this was a new strategy to cripple insurgent funding. Yet, Rourke noticed something else. After each Ghost Talon strike, within 72 hours, a series of complex, untraceable financial transactions would ripple through shadowy European banking channels. It was as if the chaos of war was being harvested, converted into cold, clean profit. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a terrified Afghan National Army interpreter named Kamal, who had briefly been loaned to Ghost Talon. Over bitter tea in a secluded corner of the bazaar, Kamal whispered of things that chilled Rourke's blood. He spoke of Voss receiving encrypted data bursts not from military satellites, but from private ones. He described how Voss and the Ghost Talon commander, a formidable major named Crow, seemed less like soldier and spook, and more like business partners. Kamal's last, trembling words before melting back into the crowd were, "They are not hunting the Taliban, Captain. They are managing them. They remove rivals. They clear the market." He pressed a small, cheap burner phone into Rourke's hand. "One number. He calls sometimes. He is a Russian. He asks about shipments." Before Rourke could ask more, Kamal was gone. That night, a poorly aimed rocket hit the interpreter's barracks. Kamal was listed among the dead. Tragic accident, the report said. Rourke knew it was a signature. Sitting in his hardened, containerized housing unit, the desert silence screaming in his ears, Rourke made his choice. He was alone. Going through normal channels was suicide. He had to get the evidence out, to someone who couldn't be silenced. He compiled everything. His own observations, the financial anomalies he'd painstakingly noted, the coordinates of Ghost Talon's strikes overlaid with historical opium routes, and the recordings he'd secretly made of his fruitless, frustrating inquiries to command. He included a digital copy of the burner phone's data. He encrypted it all onto a small, rugged flash drive. His lifeline was his sister, Sarah, an investigative journalist in D.C. who had always been his moral compass. In a carefully worded, personal-sounding email sent through a private account, he told her he was sending a USB stick with family photos. He gave her a phrase to listen for in their next video call. Remember Grandpa's old fishing spot? If he said that, it meant the photos were important, and she had to take them to the hardest-hitting, most trustworthy person she knew in media, and to a specific, incorruptible senator on the Armed Services Committee he named. He mailed the package through the military postal system, a tiny bubble of hope in a torrent of corruption. Then, he waited, the weight of his secret making every passing day a lifetime, every unfamiliar face a potential threat. The clock was ticking, and he could feel the walls of his world, once so solid and defined, beginning to close in. The package arrived at Sarah Rourke's cramped Washington, D.C. apartment on a rainy Tuesday. She almost dismissed it, expecting the promised family photos to be blurry shots of Mark and his squad. But when she slotted the drive into her laptop and saw the labyrinth of encrypted files and her brother's stark, written summary, her journalist's heart froze, then began to pound with a terrible, exhilarating rhythm. This wasn't photos, it was a live grenade with the pin pulled. She followed Mark's instructions, using the decryption key he'd hidden in a follow-up email about their childhood dog. The data that unfolded was overwhelming. Spreadsheets of coordinates, timelines of death, and mysterious financial windfalls, voice memos of Mark's desperate, stifled voice describing Voss, and the accidental death of Kamal. The scale of the conspiracy, a private military force operating within the U.S. military, directed by a shadowy civilian for what appeared to be profit, was staggering. Sarah knew she couldn't handle this alone. She reached out to her mentor, a grizzled, Pulitzer-winning reporter named Ben Grafton at the Washington Sentinel, a man known for his doggedness and his deep, protective cynicism. In a secure basement room of the newspaper, under the flicker of fluorescent lights, she showed him the drive. Grafton whistled low, his eyes scanning the data. "This isn't a story, kid," he muttered. "This is a war. And your brother is on the front line with no backup." They also covertly reached out to the staff of the senator Mark had named, a famously stubborn former Marine named James Tripp Carlson. Carlson's chief of staff, a wary woman named Anya, listened in silence and agreed to a clandestine meeting. The game was now in play on two fronts, the court of public opinion being prepared by Grafton, and the internal, lethal chessboard of government oversight. Back in Helmand, the trap was sprung. Captain Rourke was summoned not by his chain of command, but by a polite, unsmiling man from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. The interrogation was masterful. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They presented him with small, damning facts. His unauthorized use of secure terminals for personal research. His inappropriate friendship with the late interpreter Kamal. The mysterious, untraceable burner phone found in his possession, the one Kamal had given him. They framed it as a sad case of battlefield stress, of a good officer compromising operational security, perhaps even colluding with local assets for personal gain. They offered him a way out, a quiet medical discharge, no court-martial, if he just signed a confession of poor judgment and surrendered all personal data drives. They were cleaning the slate, and he was the stain. Rourke realized with dawning horror that they knew about the package to Sarah. They were boxing him in, making him look corrupt and unstable to discredit anything that might come out. He refused to sign, invoking his right to counsel. The atmosphere in the room turned to ice. That evening, confined to his quarters pending review, Rourke felt the net tightening. He saw a black SUV with tinted windows idling near the perimeter. He recognized the man in the passenger seat, one of Voss's silent aides. Paranoia, his new constant companion, told him he wouldn't make it to a hearing. He had one desperate move left. During a scheduled check-in with his company gunny, a man he trusted with his life, he passed a handwritten note. It contained a set of map coordinates and a time for that night. He was going to run, not to escape, but to find irrefutable physical proof. The coordinates led to a derelict Soviet-era watchtower deep in no man's land, a place Kamal had once hinted was used by Voss for off-the-books meetings. It was a suicidal gamble. Under the cover of a moonless night and a sudden, dusty Khamsin wind, Rourke slipped out of the base using a blind spot in the perimeter cameras he'd noted months before. He moved on foot, a lone figure swallowed by the vast, ancient darkness of the desert. The journey was a brutal ordeal of scrambling over rocks, hiding from occasional patrols, and battling a consuming fear. He reached the crumbling watchtower just before dawn. Hiding in a scree-filled gully, he watched through binoculars. And he saw it. Not a meeting, but a handoff. Elias Voss, in tactical gear but still unmistakably civilian, stood with Major Crow of Ghost Talon. They met with a group of rough-looking Afghan men who were clearly not Taliban. These were traffickers, their weapons new, their demeanor businesslike. Cases were transferred from a Ghost Talon vehicle to the traffickers' trucks. Not weapons, not ammunition. The cases were too uniform, too sleek. As the sun peaked over the horizon, A glint off one open case revealed rows of vacuum-sealed bricks. It wasn't drugs. It was U.S. currency, millions in bundled bills. Payment. A share of the profit from a cleared market. Rourke's hands shook as he used his personal, hidden camera, the one not confiscated, to capture the scene. The evidence was now real, tangible, and cinematic. But, as he zoomed in, the image stabilized on Voss's face. The man suddenly turned, not towards Rourke, but, as if sniffing the wind. He said something to Crow, who immediately scanned the horizon. They knew. They felt the exposure. Rourke slid down into the gully, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had his proof. Now he had to get it back to a world that might not even exist for him anymore. With hunters who knew the terrain far better than he did already on his trail, the digital evidence, coupled with Rourke's desperate, real-time photos from the watchtower, became the catalyst for a silent earthquake in Washington. In the Sentinel's war room, Ben Grafton and Sarah worked with a team of data forensic experts, building an unassailable narrative. They traced the financial threads from the shadowy transactions Rourke had identified to a complex web of shell companies, ultimately leading to a single holding entity registered in Luxembourg, Acheron Holdings. Meanwhile, Senator Carlson, armed with the same information but facing institutional roadblocks, launched his own informal inquiry. He called in favors from allies in the Pentagon's Inspector General office and the few intelligence community members he trusted implicitly. He hit immediate resistance. The official line was that Ghost Talon was a highly classified, successful counterterrorism unit, and any inquiry was a threat to national security and the lives of operatives. Files were lost. Witnesses were suddenly reassigned to remote postings. Carlson realized he was fighting a hydra. For every head of the conspiracy he saw, two more existed in the deep shadows of the intelligence and private contracting world. Back in the Afghan desert, Captain Rourke was in a fight for survival. His trek back to the relative safety of the base was a nightmare. Ghost Talon, utilizing resources far beyond a standard military unit, had deployed drones, small, quiet commercial models not in the standard inventory. They scoured the desert like mechanical vultures. Rourke was forced to move only at night, hiding in caves and dry riverbeds by day. He drained the battery of his phone capturing proof, leaving him with no GPS and no way to call for help. His water ran low. The desert, once a tactical landscape, became a personal oven of suffering. He was hunted not by the Taliban, but by his own countrymen or men who wore its uniform while serving another master. The psychological toll was immense. The bedrock of his identity, the U.S. Marine Corps, had fractured beneath him. He was no longer a soldier. He was prey, and his hunters had all the advantages. During a desperate, thirsty hide in a cavern, Rourke made a horrifying discovery. While checking his camera, he zoomed in on a detail from the watchtower photos he'd missed, a patch on the sleeve of one of the traffickers. It wasn't a Taliban insignia. It was the logo of a private Russian military company, the Vok Group, known to be involved in resource extraction and protection rackets in conflict zones. The pieces crashed together in his mind with brutal clarity. This wasn't just Ghost Talon manipulating the opium trade. This was a covert, violent partnership between a rogue American element and a Russian mercenary group. They were carving up the region's illicit economy, using U.S. military might to eliminate the competition for their Russian partners. The betrayal was so vast it was geopolitical. The ghost in Ghost Talon wasn't just about stealth. It was about being a phantom entity, a weapon with no loyalties, serving the highest bidder in a hidden war within the war. In D.C., the pressure reached a boiling point. A source from within the Pentagon, terrified by the senator's digging and conscience-stricken, leaked a crucial document to Grafton. It was a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Defense and a provisional security consultancy for experimental, asymmetrical threat reduction. The consultancy was a subsidiary of Acheron Holdings. The signature for the DoD was a senior official named Roland Burke, a political appointee with deep ties to the private defense industry. The memo essentially gave Ghost Talon a legal, if obscured, mandate. It was this smoking gun that connected the conspiracy to the highest levels of the war machine. Grafton and Sarah prepared to publish. Senator Carlson, knowing the story was about to blow, made a final, dramatic move on the Senate floor. He didn't name names, but he spoke in grave tones about a cancer within the national defense body, invoking his duty as a Marine to never leave a man behind. He was signaling to the conspirators that the game was up, and, to Rourke, somewhere out there, that he was not forgotten. The stage was set for public explosion, but for Rourke, lost and hunted in an endless sea of sand, the light of that exposure felt a universe away. The truth was now known, but it wouldn't save him if he couldn't make it home. The story broke on the front page of the Washington Sentinel with the force of a bunker-buster bomb. The headline was stark: Goes Talon, the secret U.S. unit that waged a private war. Ben Grafton and Sarah Rourke's byline led a masterpiece of investigative journalism, weaving Rourke's raw field data, the financial forensics, the watchtower photos, and the damning Pentagon memo into a narrative that was impossible to ignore. It named Elias Voss, Major Crow, and the senior official Roland Burke. It detailed the management of the opium trade, the partnership with the Russian Vote Group, and the deaths of men like Kamal and the ambushed Marines as collateral damage in a profit scheme. The news cycle exploded. Cable news channels ran the watchtower photos on a loop. Social media erupted. Senator Carlson, now armed with public outrage, immediately subpoenaed Burke and demanded open hearings. The Pentagon scrambled, issuing weak statements about ongoing internal reviews and the utmost seriousness with which we treat these allegations. In the chaos of the media storm, a single, focused effort was greenlit at the highest, cleanest levels of the U.S. government. It came not through standard military channels, which were now considered compromised, but through a joint task force of the CIA's extraction specialists and a few vetted Special Operations Command operators. Their mission, dubbed Operation True Compass, had one objective: find and retrieve Captain Mark Rourke alive. They had his last known coordinates from the watchtower and were tracing his probable escape routes via satellite imagery. They knew Ghost Talon would also be in a final, desperate push to silence him before he could be found. It was a race against the most ruthless of clocks. Rourke, meanwhile, was at the brink of his endurance. Dehydrated, delirious, and moving on sheer instinct, he had been driven by the hunters into a labyrinth of deep, narrow gorges. He could hear the occasional buzz of a drone above the canyon rim. He was out of water, out of hope, and nearly out of time. In his delirium, he stumbled upon a hidden cleft in the rock, leading to a small, ancient cave. It was there, in the cool darkness, that he made his last stand, not with a weapon, but with a final act of documentation. Using the last flickers of his camera's battery, he recorded a video message. His face was gaunt, cracked with dust and dried blood, but his eyes burned with a desperate fire. He stated his name, rank, and serial number. He succinctly laid out the core of the Ghost Talon conspiracy, naming Voss and Crow. He held the camera to show his parched lips, his torn uniform. "If you find this," he croaked, his voice a dry rasp, "know that I did my duty. The betrayal is real. Stop them." He buried the camera under a pile of stones, a message in a bottle cast into a desert sea, hoping it would outlive him. As he lay in the dark, conserving his last ounces of strength, he heard vehicles. Not the distant buzz of drones, but the close, grating sound of tires on rock and boots hitting the ground. Voices echoed in the canyon, American voices, using Ghost Talon's distinctive radio call signs. They had tracked him to his hole. Rourke readied his sidearm, his hands trembling not from fear now, but from weakness. He would not be taken quietly. He would make them pay for every step. As the boot steps crunched closer to the cave entrance, he aimed at the sliver of light, waiting for the shadow to appear. The end, he believed, was seconds away. But the shadow that fell across the entrance wasn't alone. A sudden, suppressed staccato of gunfire erupted from outside the cave, sharp, professional, and close. It was answered by shouts of surprise and panic from the Ghost Talon team. More expert gunfire, then silence. A new voice, calm and authoritative, called out, "Captain Rourke, U.S. Forces. We are here to extract you. Do not fire." Rourke's mind, fogged with exhaustion, couldn't process it. Was this another trick? A new layer of the trap? A figure in advanced, non-standard combat gear appeared at the entrance, weapon raised but not pointed at him. The man had American flag patches, but no other insignia. "My name is not important, Captain," the man said, his eyes scanning Rourke quickly. "We work for the good guys who read the newspaper. Senator Carlson sends his regards. Can you walk?" The rescue team, executing Operation True Compass with flawless precision, had literally arrived at the final moment. They swept the area, neutralized the Ghost Talon pursuit team, and whisked Rourke, stunned, dehydrated, but alive, into a waiting modified helicopter that had flown in, unseen, through the canyon network. As the aircraft surged skyward, leaving the deadly desert behind, Rourke looked down at the receding landscape where he had almost died, and where the truth had almost been buried forever. The fight for his life was over. The fight for justice was just landing on the shores of America. The national spectacle that followed was unlike anything Washington had seen in years. Captain Mark Rourke, medically stabilized but bearing the visible scars of his ordeal, became the silent, stoic center of a hurricane. He testified before Senator Colson's committee in a closed, then, later partially open, session. His testimony was not dramatic or emotional. It was factual, precise, and devastating. He described what he saw, what he heard, and what he survived. His recovered video from the cave was played, its raw, desperate power leaving the hearing room in a stunned silence. Senator Colson, using Rourke's testimony and the Sentinel's reporting as a battering ram, systematically dismantled the defense of the accused. The Pentagon official, Roland Burke, was forced to resign and was later indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and dereliction of duty. The legal net widened. Elias Voss had vanished the day the story broke, his identities and passports proving to be elaborate forgeries. Interpol issued a red notice, but he seemed to have evaporated into the global underworld he served, a ghost once more. Major Crow and several members of Ghost Talon were arrested at a stateside base. Facing life in military prison, Crow cut a deal. He turned state's evidence, providing a detailed confession that confirmed and expanded upon everything Rourke had uncovered. He explained how Voss had initially approached them with what seemed like top-tier, off-the-books intelligence to enhance their mission effectiveness, which slowly morphed into a directive to shape the battlefield for commercial, rather than strategic, ends. The unit, he claimed, was told they were conducting a radical but authorized experiment in economic warfare. Crow's testimony sealed the fate of the operation and implicated others in the intelligence apparatus who had turned a blind eye. The fallout was profound and systemic. A sweeping review was launched into all private military contracts and the oversight of clandestine special operations. Legislation, dubbed the Talon Act, was passed to impose unprecedented transparency and accountability on the intersection of private capital and warfare. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by new crises, but its impact lingered in policy and procedure. The war in Afghanistan continued, but the Ghost Talon model of privatized, profit-driven conflict had been exposed and, for a time, cauterized. For the individuals at the heart of the storm, life moved on, but was forever altered. Ben Grafton and Sarah Rourke shared a Pulitzer Prize for their groundbreaking work. Sarah, however, found the taste of victory bittersweet. She had saved her brother and exposed a great evil, but the cost to him was something she felt every day. Senator Colson saw his reputation cemented as a fearless reformer, but the experience deepened his cynicism about the institutions he loved. He and Rourke shared a quiet, enduring bond, a mutual respect forged in the fire of truth. Captain Mark Rourke received an honorable discharge, medals for his bravery, and a handshake from a grateful president. But the military he had devoted his life to was now an institution that had harbored the monster he fought. The betrayal was a wound that didn't heal. He turned down lucrative speaking offers and book deals. He found he could not return to a normal life. The desert and the cave had marked him. After a long period of recovery and solitude, he made a decision. Using his unique, hard-won understanding of the shadows where corruption festered, he went to work quietly for Senator Colson's personal oversight team, and later as a consultant to vetted NGOs, helping to audit conflict zone contracts and spot the patterns of the next Ghost Talon before it could take root. He did not wear a uniform, but his sense of duty had not left him. It had evolved. He became a watchman, a guardian against the ghosts in the machine, knowing that the truth, no matter how shocking, was only the first step. The real work was in the vigilant, unending effort to ensure it never had to be exposed again. The story had ended, but his mission, born in the heat and fear of a distant desert, had just found its true purpose. This response is AI-generated and, for reference purposes only,